The Boring History for Sleep. Victorian Insomnia Cures You'd Rather Not Try. Hey guys, tonight we wander back in time to an age of gaslit streets. Soot-streaked chimneys and carriages rattling on cobblestones, the Victorian era. The air is cool and thick with the faint smell of coal smoke, the sky above a dull orange haze that never seems to fully fade. It's late, very late, and you should be asleep. But tonight you're one of the many who can't close your eyes no matter how hard you try. Victorians had a word for it: insomnia, a relentless affliction that kept the sleepless pacing floors and staring at ceilings in candlelight. They feared it too, not just because it made them tired, but because they believed it could drive you mad. And honestly, after enough nights without rest, they might not have been entirely wrong. You probably wouldn't survive this. There are no comfortable memory foam mattresses here, no phone to scroll until you doze off, and certainly no late-night snacks delivered to your door. If you're awake, you're alone with your thoughts and the distant clop of horse hooves echoing through the fog. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, I'd love it if you commented with your location and the local time where you are right now. It's always fascinating to see where everyone's tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander slowly through narrow Victorian streets, the glow from the gas lamps barely holding back the darkness. The houses are quiet, but you can almost sense the countless people lying awake behind those brick walls. Insomnia is something Victorians understand all too well, though their reasons for fearing it might surprise you. Doctors at the time believed that sleeplessness was a sign of nervous exhaustion, a vague diagnosis tied to the stresses of modern life. The Industrial Revolution had changed everything: long work hours, crowded cities, and a pace of life that felt relentless. If you couldn't sleep, it meant your body and mind were breaking down, and that idea alone was enough to make you even more anxious. Historians still argue whether these fears were grounded in real science or simply a reflection of Victorian anxieties, but it's clear they took insomnia very seriously. You glance up at one tall row house and notice a flicker of candlelight in an upstairs window. Inside, a man paces back and forth in a threadbare dressing gown, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. He pauses occasionally to press his forehead against the cool glass as though hoping the night air will somehow lull him to sleep. But it won't. For Victorians, sleeplessness isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. Some doctors warn it could lead to softening of the brain, an ominous phrase that no one really understands but everyone fears. Walking further down the street, you pass an apothecary's shop with its wooden shutters pulled closed. By day, this place is busy with customers seeking help for their restless nights. They buy little vials of laudanum herbal tonics or mysterious powders, all promised to deliver the sweet relief of sleep. But not everyone trusts the chemist's concoctions. Many prefer to try home remedies, first clutching at any solution that might bring rest without the risk of poison. You step into a narrow alley where the city's noises fade slightly. Here, the insomnia feels heavier, almost tangible. You picture the countless Victorians lying awake in stuffy bedrooms, their minds racing as they stare at the cracked plaster ceiling. Some are industrial laborers who can't afford to miss a day's work. Others are wealthy socialites whose social calendars leave them drained, but unable to shut off their thoughts. Sleeplessness is a universal problem, crossing class lines with ease. One home you pass belongs to a young mother. You can hear the faint whimper of a baby from inside, and you imagine her rocking. The child praying both of them will get even a few hours of rest. Across the street, a widower lies awake in a narrow bed, counting the ticks of the clock as his grief gnaws at the edges of his sanity. And just a few doors down, a businessman stares at a stack of unpaid bills, certain that his sleepless nights will soon ruin him. As you continue walking, you spot a notice posted to a lamppost, a flyer advertising the services of a sleep specialist. The bold letters promise a cure for nervous agitation and sleepless torments using methods guaranteed by science. You can't help but smirk a little. Victorian science could mean almost anything from gentle herbal remedies to practices that seem outright absurd by today's standards. You pause at the corner where a cat slinks across the street, its shadow stretching long and thin. The faint sound of church bells carries through the night, marking the hour, though it's impossible to know if you've been out for 1 hour or 3. The fog makes time feel slippery, and perhaps that's part of the misery of insomnia, the endless, creeping sense that dawn will never come. But the Victorians will keep trying to fix it. In the coming hours, you'll see some of the many remedies they turn to, from the quaint to the questionable, each one a reflection of their fears and their ingenuity. And as you glance up at another glowing window where a sleepless figure sits slumped in a chair, you realize just how desperate people can become when they're robbed of something as simple as rest. You drift further down the street, your footsteps soft against the cobblestones. The gas lamps sputter in the damp air, throwing flickering shadows on the walls. Just ahead, the faint scent of bitter herbs and alcohol reaches your nose, guiding you to the source, an apothecary still open well past midnight. Its door creaks as you push it open, and you're greeted by the warm glow of oil lamps and the faint rustle of papers. The shelves inside are crowded with bottles and boxes of all shapes and sizes. Labels promise restorative tonics, nervous remedies, and most boldly, instant slumber. Behind the counter, a bespectacled chemist in a faded waistcoat is busy measuring out powders onto a brass scale. He glances up and gives you a knowing nod. Sleepless faces like yours are common here. Like yours? You wander along the shelves, reading labels and marveling at the sheer variety. There's chloral hydrate, a sedative that doctors sometimes prescribe, despite its potential for addiction and overdose. Nearby sits a bottle of bromide salts, another popular option in Victorian insomnia treatment. One small vial simply reads sleeping draft, the contents a mysterious blend of alcohol, opiates, and who knows what else. You can't help but wonder how many Victorians drank these concoctions without knowing exactly what was in them. The chemist holds up a small amber bottle of laudanum, a tincture of opium mixed with wine or spirits, and tells you it's one of his best sellers. Parents even give it to their children in small doses, he explains matter-of-factly, though you can hear a trace of unease in his voice. Historians still argue whether Victorians understood how dangerous laudanum was or if they simply didn't care. Either way, it was cheap. Easy to get and promised the one thing everyone craved: a full night's sleep. A young woman enters the shop clutching a few coins in her gloved hand. She speaks quietly to the chemist, her voice trembling as she asks for something stronger. You watch as he fills a small paper packet with a bitter-smelling powder and warns her to take only a pinch. She nods, though you can tell she plans to ignore the advice. Desperation makes people reckless, and insomnia drives desperation better than almost anything else. You move to a quieter corner of the shop where a small display case glitters with patent medicines. Their brightly colored labels shout promises of deep restorative rest and refreshment of the soul. One tin of Dr. Bickford's sleep lozenges claims to work in minutes, while another bottle of nightly nectar assures customers they'll wake refreshed and cheerful. You pick one up and notice the ingredients list is vague at best. Most likely these so-called cures are packed with alcohol or sedatives, but the Victorians rarely ask questions. The chemist steps over and hands you a tiny corked bottle filled with clear liquid. A simple valerian tincture, he says, as though he's offering something mild and safe. You swirl the liquid and catch a whiff of its pungent, almost sweaty scent. He explains that valerian root has been used for centuries as a calming herb, though he admits it's not always effective. Still, many customers swear by it, and you can't help but picture sleepless Victorians clutching the bottle in the dark, hoping for even a single hour of rest. A small clock on the wall ticks softly, and you realize how easy it would be to lose track of time in a place like this. The chemist continues his work, wrapping packets of powders and filling bottles with practiced hands. Every now and then he glances at the door, waiting for the next desperate soul to appear. You step back outside the cool night air, a sharp contrast to the apothecary's warmth. The street is quiet again, though you can still smell the sharp tang of laudanum clinging to your clothes. As you walk, you imagine the countless Victorians who relied on these remedies night after night, knowing full well they might be trading short-term relief for long-term harm. Up ahead, you notice a faint glow from a narrow townhouse window. Inside, a woman sits at her kitchen table, slowly sipping from a steaming mug. The smell of dried herbs drifts through the open window, and you realize you're about to see another type of insomnia cure one rooted less in science and more in tradition. You step closer to the narrow townhouse drawn by the faint, earthy smell of steeping herbs. The window is cracked open just enough to let the steam escape curling into the cool night air. Inside, a woman in a worn shawl stirs a small pot on the stove. Her movements are slow and deliberate, as though she's done this ritual 100 times before. The scent of valerian root is unmistakable, pungent, musky, and a little like dirty socks left too long in the laundry. You wince slightly but watch as she pours the tea into a delicate porcelain cup, the steam rising in soft curls. She takes a tentative sip and shudders. It's not pleasant, but she drinks anyway because Victorian wisdom says valerian can quiet the restless mind. Historians still argue how effective it actually was, but you know that for many sleepless Victorians, hope was half the cure. On the counter nearby, you spot a bundle of dried lettuce leaves. The woman adds a few to the pot for the next round, muttering something about lettuce water. You arch an eyebrow at the thought steeping lettuce like tea sounds absurd, but Victorians swore by it. They believed that the milky sap inside the leaves had sedative properties, and even though it likely did little more than taste bland, it was a staple in many households. The woman pauses to add another ingredient, a few sprigs of lavender plucked from a bunch, hanging by the window. Lavender's sweet floral scent cuts through the bitterness of the other herbs, and you breathe it in with relief. She explains to no one in particular that lavender calms the nerves, a belief passed down from her grandmother, and likely her grandmother's grandmother before that. You lean against the doorframe, imagining how many other Victorians were brewing their own strange mixtures at this very moment. Dandelion roots, chamomile flowers, hops, even warm beer. It seems no plant or drink was off limits if it might coax the body into sleep. One pamphlet you recall reading earlier in the apothecary even recommended boiling a handful of onions and drinking the water. You try not to think about the smell of that one. The woman sets her empty cup on the table and glances at a small, tattered booklet. It's a home remedy guide filled with handwritten notes and marginalia. She flips to a page marked with a ribbon reading aloud a recipe for soothing slumber tea. It calls for valerian hops, lemon balm, and, bizarrely, a pinch of nutmeg. She nods to herself as though this combination will finally bring the elusive sleep she's been chasing for weeks. In the corner of the room, a young boy stirs in his bed, whimpering softly. She crosses to him and tucks a sprig of rosemary under his pillow, explaining in a hushed voice that it will keep nightmares away. You wonder if she believes it, or if she's simply repeating the superstition out of habit. Either way, the boy relaxes and she watches him for a long moment, before returning to her seat. You slip back outside into the night, the sharp scent of valerian still clinging to your clothes. The streets are quieter now, but your ears catch a faint sound from a nearby alley, the clinking of glass bottles. You follow it and discover a man in a flat cap rummaging through a wooden crate. He pulls out a bottle labeled Balm of Sleep and uncorks it, taking a deep swig. The liquid smells sweet and medicinal, like a mix of honey and overripe fruit. He wipes his mouth on his sleeve and sighs contentedly as though he believes it will work. He notices you watching and shrugs. It's just herbs, he says, though. His eyes dart away nervously. You suspect the mixture is laced with more than just herbs, perhaps a heavy dose of alcohol to dull the senses. You can't blame him. For the sleepless, a little oblivion might feel like mercy. A cool breeze rustles through the alley and you pull your coat tighter as you continue walking. The smell of herbs lingers in your nose, mingling with the distant coal smoke from the factories. Victorians will try almost anything in their search for rest plants. Teas, charms tucked under pillows. Some remedies are harmless, others less so, but all are born from the same simple desire to finally blessedly close their eyes. As you turn a corner, a flicker of orange light catches your eye. Through a cracked door, you glimpse a small room, crowded with chairs and tables, a faint haze of smoke hanging in the air. Inside, a man in a black waistcoat measures out a dark, syrupy liquid into small glass vials. You recognize the sharp, bitter smell of opium, even from where you stand. This isn't a cozy kitchen or an apothecary's shop. This is something altogether different and far more dangerous. You step cautiously through the cracked door into the dimly lit room, the air heavy with the unmistakable smell of opium. It's sweet and bitter, all at once, a cloying scent that seeps into your clothes and clings to the back of your throat. The room is crowded with small tables, each one occupied by men and women who look as though they haven't slept in days. They cradle glass vials and cups like lifelines, their eyes glazed, their movements sluggish. At the back of the room, a man in a black waistcoat stands behind a wooden counter, filling tiny bottles with a dark, viscous liquid. This is laudanum, the Victorian-era darling of insomnia, cures a potent mix of opium and alcohol. He works with practiced efficiency, measuring doses that could knock out an elephant. You sidle closer, trying not to draw attention to yourself, and watch as he corks each vial before sliding it across the counter to a waiting customer. Laudanum is everywhere in Victorian society. It's cheap, easy to buy, and for the sleepless, it works at least in the short term. But its dangers are just as great as its allure. Historians still argue how much Victorians truly understood about the drug's addictive nature. Some surely knew. Others chose to ignore it because the alternative was endless nights of tossing and turning. A young mother steps forward, clutching a small child in her arms. The shopkeeper hands her a vial and explains how to dilute it in water for the baby. You feel a chill run down your spine. The child can't be older than 2, yet the mother will give her a few drops in hopes of calming her cries. It's a sobering reminder that insomnia isn't confined to adults, and desperation can lead even the most loving parents to risky decisions. You slide away from the counter and settle near a table where 2 men are arguing in hushed tones. One insists laudanum is a miracle, the only thing that allows him to function. The other mutters about side effects, nightmare stomach cramps, and a growing need for stronger doses. They both fall silent when a thin man with hollow cheeks approaches and orders 3 vials. He barely looks at the shopkeeper as he pays, already uncorking one to take a long, shaky swallow. In another corner, you notice a stack of pamphlets advertising Dr. Godfrey's cordial Mother Bailey's quieting syrup and other narcotic-laden concoctions. Many are marketed for children, a thought that makes your stomach turn. These patent medicines are little more than diluted opium, designed to knock a restless child into hours of deep, dreamless sleep. You wonder how many families relied on these syrups to get through the night, never realizing the harm they might be causing. The shopkeeper calls for everyone to finish their purchases, and the customers shuffle out into the foggy street, clutching their bottles close. You follow, relieved to be back in the cool night air, though the smell of opium still lingers in your nose. As you walk, you think about how pervasive laudanum is in Victorian society. Writers romanticize it, doctors prescribe it freely, and even the poorest households find ways to afford it. But there's a darker side too: addiction overdose, and the quiet devastation it can cause behind closed doors. Further down the street, you pass a wealthy townhouse where the windows glow softly with lamplight. Inside, a woman in a silk dressing gown reclines on a chaise lounge, sipping from a crystal glass filled with what looks like sherry. But you know better. The amber liquid is likely laudanum, the fashionable solution for sleepless nights among the upper class. She tilts her head back, like eyes half closed, and you can't tell whether she's drifting off to sleep or simply drifting away. You continue walking, and the city grows quieter. The streets are nearly empty now, save for the occasional carriage rattling by. A faint hum of machinery carries from a distant factory, the heartbeat of the industrial city that never fully rests. You think about how many of its workers will turn to laudanum tonight, trying to find relief before another grueling shift. A flicker of light draws your attention to a nearby shop window. Inside, you see a display of strange contraptions, metallic headbands, bulky boxes with wires, and something that looks suspiciously like a small, hand-cranked generator. The sign above the door reads electrotherapeutic devices for the nervous and sleepless. You pause, intrigued and slightly wary. The Victorians are about to show you another of their questionable solutions, and this one might be even stranger than the last. You hesitate at the shop door, the faint crackle of electricity audible even from the street. Victorian curiosity and desperation blend here, producing something that feels equal parts hopeful and unsettling. You step inside, and the smell of hot metal and singed cloth hits you immediately. The room is filled with odd-looking machines, brass coils, glass tubes, and polished wooden boxes adorned with dials and levers. A sign above the counter proudly declares electrotherapeutic relief for the sleepless and nervous. A man in a neatly pressed suit approaches his smile just a little too bright. He introduces himself as a sleep specialist and gestures toward a device that resembles a large wooden helmet with wires protruding from its sides. He assures you it is perfectly safe and guaranteed to rearrange the disordered energies of the mind. You suppress a laugh and glance at the chair where you're meant to sit. The leather is worn and cracked, evidence of many sleepless customers before you. You decide to watch instead as a young man reluctantly takes the seat. The specialist fits the metal headband snugly around his temples, connects a wire to a small hand-cranked generator, and begins turning the handle. The faint hum grows louder, and the young man stiffens as a current passes through his body. You can see his jaw clench, his fingers twitching slightly as the specialist assures him the sensation is merely a gentle tonic for the nerves. You aren't sure whether to be impressed or horrified. Historians still argue whether these early electrotherapy devices had any real therapeutic value or were simply elaborate placebos. The specialist clearly believes in them, or at least believes in their profitability. He touts success stories of insomniacs who claim to sleep soundly after a few treatments. You wonder how many of them said that simply because they were too embarrassed to admit it hadn't worked. Nearby, a woman is strapped to a different contraption that looks like a cross between a sewing machine and a music box. It delivers small, rhythmic shocks through her hands while a set of gears rotates ominously behind her. She winces occasionally but says nothing, her eyes fixed on the floor. The specialist explains that this device stimulates the body's natural rhythms and can restore healthy sleep cycles. You have your doubts, especially when he adjusts the machine and the woman jerks slightly in her seat. Another machine catches your eye, a large box with two handles and a dial marked mild to strong. The specialist proudly demonstrates how customers can purchase this portable unit to use at home. He describes it as a personal sleep tonic, but you can't help imagining someone accidentally shocking themselves wide awake instead. One customer asks about side effects, and the specialist waves the question away with a reassuring chuckle. Perhaps a little redness at the points of contact, he admits, but otherwise nothing serious. You glance at the young man removing the helmet, his hair standing on end, and a dazed expression on his face. He nods vaguely when asked how he feels, though it's hard to tell whether he's calmer or just stunned. You wander toward a display of smaller devices, each one more bizarre than the last. There's a vibrating pillow said to massage away nervous energy, a wand that delivers mild shocks when pressed to the temples, and a foot bath with electrodes dangling ominously over its surface. The salesman beams as he explains how each device is scientifically engineered to coax the body into slumber. A pamphlet on the counter promises that electrotherapy is the future of medicine, capable of curing not just insomnia, but a host of other ailments from headaches to indigestion. You skim the testimonials, noting how similar they all sound. It's clear that electricity has captured the Victorian imagination, even if its practical applications are questionable. As you step back toward the door, you overhear a couple debating whether to buy one of the devices. The husband insists it's worth the investment if it means finally getting a good night's sleep. The wife frowns, pointing out the high cost and the risk of harm. They eventually compromise, purchasing a cheaper hand-cranked unit to test at home. You can't decide whether to wish them luck or advise them to stick to lavender tea. Outside, the fog has thickened, muffling the sounds of the city. You walk slowly, still picturing the young man's wide-eyed expression as the current passed through his body. Victorians were willing to try almost anything to escape insomnia, even if it meant turning themselves into experiments. Up ahead, you hear a faint humming noise that isn't electrical at all. It's melodic, almost hypnotic, drifting from a tall townhouse with its windows cracked open. As you approach, the sound becomes clearer, a steady rhythm like the soft lull of ocean waves, punctuated by a low mechanical drone. curiosity pulls you toward the source. Victorians, it seems, also believed sound itself could coax the body into sleep, and you're about to witness one of their more peculiar attempts. You follow the hypnotic hum to a tall, narrow townhouse. Its windows cracked open just enough for the sound to drift into the foggy street. You step inside cautiously, greeted by the faint smell of wax and polished wood. The noise is louder now, a low, droning rhythm punctuated by faint, bell-like chimes. The room before you looks like a cross between a music hall and a laboratory. At the center stands a large wooden contraption half the size of a wardrobe, with brass tubes, glass globes, and spinning wheels that emit a constant hum. A small crowd has gathered around it, eyes, half-closed heads, gently bobbing in time with the vibrations. A man in a smart waistcoat steps forward, introducing himself as the inventor. He beams with pride as he gestures to the machine, the harmonic somnolator. He calls it a scientifically proven sound therapy device to cure the torments of insomnia. You arch an eyebrow at the name, but the inventor is clearly sincere. He explains that the somnolator emits calibrated sonic frequencies designed to calm the nervous system and lull the brain into sleep. To demonstrate, he cranks a lever, and the hum deepens, resonating through the wooden floor. The vibrations tickle your feet, and you feel the faintest flutter of drowsiness, though, that might just be the warm air in the room. Nearby, another group sits around a smaller device, a spinning disc, studded with chimes and tiny bells. The operator sets it in motion, and the resulting sound is soft and almost hypnotic. You watch as the participants lean back in their chairs, some closing their eyes as if surrendering to the rhythm. Historians still argue whether these sound machines actually worked, or if they simply provided a comforting distraction, but you can see how the steady tones might ease a restless mind. A woman in a pale nightdress stands to the side, clutching a small box to her chest. She opens it to reveal a sleep music box, a popular household item that plays gentle melodies on a loop. She winds the key and holds it close to her ear, the tinny tune barely audible over the larger machine's hum. She tells you that she plays it each night until her eyes grow heavy, though her husband finds it annoying. Another man proudly shows off his mechanical lullaby pillow, a contraption that looks alarmingly like a small clock stuffed inside a cushion. It ticks softly as it emits faint vibrations, the idea being that the combination of sound and motion will soothe the sleepless into slumber. He swears by it, though. You notice the deep circles under his eyes. The inventor's assistant hands you a pamphlet extolling the virtues of sound therapy. It promises relief not only from insomnia, but also from nervous agitation, melancholy, and even indigestion. You can't help but smile at the lofty claims. The Victorians truly believed that the right noise could reorder the body's rhythms, much like tuning an instrument. One corner of the room holds a more spiritual take on sound therapy. A small group sits in a circle, humming in unison, while the leader swings a pendulum overhead. The combined hum creates a strange resonant tone that fills the air. Some participants rock back and forth, others clasp their hands together as though in prayer. You wonder whether they're genuinely drifting toward sleep or simply losing themselves in the ritual. The inventor proudly explains that his machines are used in hospitals, private homes, and even by royalty. He tells a story about a nobleman who, after years of sleeplessness, finally fell asleep, listening to the somnolator's hum. You suspect the nobleman might also have been exhausted from boredom, but you keep that thought to yourself. A young boy tugs at your sleeve and points to a corner where a small phonograph plays a crackling recording of a lullaby. He whispers that it's his favorite because it reminds him of his grandmother singing. You crouch down and listen with him for a while, the soft melody somehow more touching than the elaborate machines around you. After an hour, the crowd begins to thin. Some leave yawning, convinced they're on the brink of sleep, while others walk away muttering about wasted time. The inventor beams regardless, already demonstrating the somnolator to a fresh group of hopeful customers. You step back outside into the misty street, your ears still buzzing faintly from the droning hum. The city is quieter now, and you can't help but think about how much effort Victorians put into creating the perfect conditions for rest. Some, you suspect, relied on more than sound. A flicker of warm light draws your attention to a grand townhouse just ahead. Through the window, you see servants moving silently through hallways, snuffing out lamps and drawing thick curtains. The household is preparing for bed with the kind of precision only the Victorian elite could manage. Curious, you step closer, ready to witness the strict bedtime regimens that many believed were key to curing insomnia. You approach the grand townhouse, its tall windows glowing softly as servants move methodically through each room. The massive front door is ajar as if inviting you in, and you step quietly over the threshold. The scent of beeswax, polish, and faint lavender greets you, a sign of a household that spares no detail in its nightly routine. Inside, the atmosphere is one of hushed precision. Servants pad silently across thick carpets, extinguishing the last of the gas lamps, while others draw heavy curtains to block out the city's dim glow. The air grows darker, cooler, and more still with each flickering flame that dies away. It's a ritual one Victorians believed essential for sleep: remove every distraction, every possible disturbance so that the body might finally surrender to rest. You follow a footman up a wide staircase lined with family portraits. He pauses at the landing to ensure no one is speaking too loudly silent. After all, is part of the cure. In the nursery, a governess gently ushers children into their beds, tucking them tightly under layers of blankets. She places warm milk by their nightstands, encouraging a few sips before snuffing the lamp. One child protests, but the governess simply reminds him that milk soothes the nerves. Historians still argue whether the calcium or the ritual itself mattered more, but the belief is strong enough to endure for generations. In the master bedroom, the scene is even more elaborate. A lady's maid brushes her mistress's hair 100 strokes each slow pass, meant to relax the scalp and mind. The lady herself sits upright, sipping a cup of what you suspect is more warm milk, laced with a pinch of nutmeg. She glances at a clock on the mantelpiece, noting the precise time. Bedtime is scheduled and deviation is frowned upon. Her husband paces the room, reciting aloud a list of things to do the next day. He claims this helps him clear the mind before lying down, though you suspect it might just pass the time until he's too tired to think. One of the servants enters carrying a bowl of hot water and a towel. He explains that the master prefers to bathe his feet before bed, a practice believed to draw blood away from the brain and induce drowsiness. Nearby, a physician called in for advice watches quietly, nodding in approval. He suggests that if sleep still proves elusive, the couple should rise and read a few pages from the Bible, or perhaps recite a series of prayers. He believes that the act of repetition and moral contemplation can lull even the most anxious mind. You picture countless Victorians mumbling verses into the dark, hoping the words themselves might pull them towards sleep. In another room down the hall, you find a servant sprinkling powdered camphor on pillows and mattresses. The pungent scent is meant to keep the air pure, a Victorian obsession tied closely to health. He also checks that the bedroom windows are cracked just enough to allow a bit of fresh air. Too much, they believe, could chill the body and disturb sleep. Too little, and the room becomes stuffy and unhealthy. It's a careful balance, and he adjusts the curtains until it feels just right. You pass by a small sitting room where a young woman sits upright in a straight-backed chair, knitting quietly by the dim glow of a single candle. She explains that lying down too early can invite restless thoughts, so she waits until she's truly tired. Knitting, she says, keeps her hands busy without overstimulating the mind. You think about how many people today scroll on their phones for the same reason, though knitting probably produces less anxiety. Further down the hall, an older man lies in a bed with thick wooden boards on each side, creating a cocoon-like effect. He tells you it helps him feel secure and reduces tossing and turning. You notice he clutches a small pouch of dried hops under his pillow, a common folk charm believed to calm the nerves. He shrugs when you ask if it works, but admits he's too afraid to sleep without it. Back in the master bedroom, the household finally settles. The lady of the house extinguishes the last lamp, plunging the room into total darkness. There's no moonlight here, no faint glow of a street lamp, only the deep velvet black Victorians believed essential for sleep. You can hear the faint rustle of sheets as the couple shifts in bed, their breathing slowly deepening. The house grows still, Yet you know this careful regimen doesn't always work. Insomnia can be stubborn, immune to even the strictest routines. And for those who remain awake after all this effort, more extreme remedies await. As you step out into the cool night air, you see a plume of steam rising from a nearby building. Its brick walls and smoking chimneys suggest something industrial, but the faint sound of running water and muffled voices tells you otherwise. Curious, you follow the trail and discover a Victorian bathhouse where sleepless patrons line up for a different kind of treatment. Plunges into freezing water or sweltering heat rooms, all in the name of sleep. You push open the heavy wooden door to the Victorian bathhouse, and a wall of steamy air rushes out to greet you. The sound of rushing water echoes off the tiled walls, mingling with the soft murmur of attendants directing patrons to their respective rooms. You step inside the floor, slick under your boots, and instantly feel the temperature rise. A man in a crisp white uniform approaches, clipboard in hand, and asks whether you prefer the hot or the cold treatment. His tone is matter-of-fact, as though these extremes are perfectly ordinary. You glance past him into the large central room where some patrons sit wrapped in towels, sipping weak tea after what appears to have been a very intense experience. Others shuffle nervously toward the treatment chambers, clutching themselves against the chill. You decide to observe, first slipping quietly into a corner as an attendant leads a middle-aged man into the cold plunge room. The door opens and you catch a glimpse of a long rectangular pool. The water's so clear and still it looks almost frozen. The man steps gingerly down the stone steps, gasping audibly as the icy water envelops his legs, his torso, then his shoulders. The attendant explains that this shock to the system redirects the body's energies and can quiet the mind for restful sleep. You aren't convinced. The man's teeth are chattering so loudly you wonder how anyone could relax under those conditions. Historians still argue whether these temperature therapies had any legitimate physiological effect or were simply a form of Victorian masochism, but the people here believe in it fervently, as evidenced by the determined expressions of those lowering themselves into water that looks only a few degrees shy of freezing. On the opposite side of the bathhouse is the heat room, a domed chamber filled with thick, humid air. You wipe sweat from your brow as you peek inside, where patrons lounge on stone benches, their faces flushed. The air smells faintly of eucalyptus leaves added to the steam for a supposed calming effect. One woman mutters that the stifling heat makes her drowsy, and you can see why. It's like sitting inside a giant kettle, and after only a few minutes you feel your limbs growing heavy. An attendant circulates through the room, pouring ladles of water onto hot stones, sending up clouds of steam that blur the outlines of the people around you. He tells a story about how some patients alternate between the cold plunge and the heat room, claiming the contrast balances the humors and resets the body. You shudder at the thought of jumping from this oppressive warmth into icy water. Back in the main hall, a physician in a dark suit is giving a lecture to a small group of patients. He explains that insomnia is a result of overheated nerves, and that the bathhouse therapies cool and cleanse the system. You glance at the pale, exhausted faces in the audience and wonder if they believe him or if they're simply too tired to question anything. You wander past a smaller room where a young man is seated in a wooden tub filled with alternating layers of warm and cold cloths. He looks miserable but stoic, as though enduring the treatment is a badge of honor. The attendant overseeing the session notes that he'll sleep like a baby tonight. You resist the urge to ask how he's supposed to do that while shivering. Another chamber houses a more bizarre device, a steam cabinet, resembling an upright coffin with the patient's head sticking out. Inside, jets of steam blast the body with moist heat for 15 minutes at a time. One woman emerges from the cabinet drenched and woozy, clutching the attendant's arm for support. She insists she feels better, though you suspect she's simply grateful to be out of the contraption. In the corner of the bathhouse, a man nurses a cup of warm beef tea, a popular Victorian post-treatment drink believed to restore strength. He tells you that he's been coming here every week for months, and swears the combination of ice baths and steam rooms has improved his sleep. You nod politely, though you can't help but think a warm bed would be much more effective. The attendants begin dimming the gas lamps as the evening wears on and patrons shuffle out into the night, their bodies either flushed from heat or chilled to the bone. You step outside with them, grateful for the cool air, and reflect on the lengths Victorians would go in the hope of a good night's sleep. Up the street, a modest townhouse glows faintly with lamplight. A small sign by the door reads, "Mesmeric Treatments for Nervous Disorders." You catch a glimpse through the window, a man swinging a pendulum before a seated patient, murmuring softly as the patient's eyes grow heavy. The scene feels otherworldly, like something from a seance. Curious, you step closer, ready to witness how hypnotists and mesmerists promise to lull even the most stubborn insomniacs into rest. You step quietly through the door of the townhouse, the faint smell of incense mingling with the crisp scent of freshly polished wood. The room is dimly lit, curtains drawn tight, a single oil lamp casting a soft amber glow. A small group of people sits in a semicircle, their chairs arranged around a man in a dark suit, with piercing eyes and a faintly theatrical air. This is the mesmerist, and his presence fills the room as completely as the haze of incense. In the center sits a young woman, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The mesmerist swings a small brass pendulum before her, the delicate chain glinting in the lamplight. His voice is low and steady, a gentle cadence that seems designed to lull even the most skeptical listener. "Watch the motion," he says softly. "Your eyes grow heavy. Your thoughts are drifting. Drifting." The woman's eyelids flutter as she follows the pendulum's arc, and you feel a small shiver creep up your spine. Mesmerism, named after the Austrian physician Franz Mesmer, was wildly popular in Victorian society. Followers believed that an invisible force called animal magnetism flowed through every living thing, and that trained mesmerists could manipulate it to restore balance. For the sleepless, it promised a painless and drug-free solution. Simply surrender your consciousness to the soothing voice of the mesmerist. Historians still argue whether it was genuine therapy or elaborate theater, but either way, it drew desperate patients by the dozens. The mesmerist's assistant, a woman in a high-collared dress, quietly ushers you to the back of the room where you observe in silence. She whispers that many patients arrive after exhausting every other cure herbal tea's laudanum, even electrotherapy. Some find relief here, others don't. You glance at the faces in the semicircle, some wide-eyed with hope, others dulled by disappointment. The mesmerist's voice deepens as he tells the young woman that she will feel her limbs growing warm and heavy, that each breath will sink her deeper into rest. She nods faintly, swaying slightly in her chair. He places a hand gently on her forehead and announces, "Sleep." Her body slumps forward and the room collectively exhales. He assures the onlookers that she will awaken refreshed and ready for a full night's sleep. Nearby, another practitioner, a self-styled hypnotist, works with a middle-aged man suffering from chronic insomnia. Instead of a pendulum, he uses a repetitive touch on the man's shoulder and a rhythmic tapping on the table. "Your worries are fading," he intones softly. "You are safe. You will sleep." The man's eyelids droop, though it's hard to tell if it's hypnosis or simple exhaustion. A pamphlet on the side table catches your eye. It boasts testimonials from patients cured of sleeplessness, nervous disorders, and even digestive problems. You read about a woman who claimed she slept for 10 hours straight after a single session, and a factory worker who said his night terrors vanished entirely. You can't help but notice how similar the success stories sound, as though written by the same enthusiastic hand. The mesmerist calls the young woman's name softly, and her eyes flutter open. She looks around dazed but calm. He asks how she feels, and she whispers, "Peaceful." The crowd nods approvingly, though you wonder how long the effect will last once she's back in her own bed. In a smaller adjoining room, you find a more intimate session underway. A man lies on a chaise lounge, hands folded on his chest as a mesmerist leans over him. The mesmerist uses a series of slow, deliberate passes of his hands over the man's body, claiming to realign the magnetism. The man's breathing slows, and you notice a faint smile on his lips. Perhaps belief is half the cure. The assistant offers you a seat, but you decline, preferring to watch as the final patient of the night takes her place. She admits she has been awake for 3 nights straight and is willing to try anything. The mesmerist begins his routine again, the pendulum, the soft voice, the promise of release. You see her shoulders relax, her jaw unclench. As the session ends, the mesmerist gently thanks his patients and reminds them to return if their insomnia persists. They shuffle out quietly, some yawning, others deep in thought. You step into the cool night air with them, the fog thicker now, the street eerily still. Up ahead, a shop window glows invitingly. Behind the glass is an assortment of elaborate furniture beds with towering headboards, chaise longues, and even chairs equipped with springs and gears. A sign proclaims revolutionary sleep furniture guaranteed to end restless nights. You sigh softly, realizing the Victorians were willing to try just about anything. Curious, you walk closer, ready to see how much hope they placed in a good piece of furniture. You step through the shop's ornate glass door, the tinkling of a brass bell announcing your arrival. The scent of freshly polished wood fills the air, mingled with the faint sweetness of varnish and new upholstery. Rows of beds and chairs stretch out before you, each piece more elaborate than the last. The salesman, a balding man in a tailored waistcoat, hurries over with a wide smile. "Ah, welcome," he says in a voice practiced for charm. "You've come to see our patented sleep furniture, yes. Guaranteed to cure even the most stubborn insomnia." He gestures dramatically to the centerpiece of the showroom, an enormous bed with a headboard towering nearly to the ceiling, carved with intricate floral designs. It looks more like a throne than a place to rest. The salesman explains that the bed is designed to cradle the sleeper at a precise anatomical angle to encourage relaxation. You can't help but notice the hefty price tag dangling discreetly from one of the posts. A young couple tests out the bed, the wife sinking into its deep mattress while her husband adjusts a series of levers built into the frame. The salesman proudly points out how the head and foot of the bed can be raised or lowered independently, allowing the sleeper to encourage circulation or relieve nervous tension. The husband seems impressed, though his wife looks mildly seasick as the bed shifts beneath her. Historians still argue whether Victorian sleep furniture was more about comfort or spectacle. Looking around, you suspect it was both. Nearby is a chaise longue upholstered in deep green velvet fitted with hidden springs that gently rock the user. The salesman demonstrates by pressing a discreet pedal, and the chaise begins to sway in a slow, hypnotic motion. Perfect for those who find it difficult to drift off unaided, he assures you. In the corner stands a curious contraption, a chair with a large brass wheel attached to the back. The salesman beams as he cranks the wheel, causing the chair to vibrate violently. He calls it the somno-massager, a device meant to shake away nervous energy. You wince as the vibrations rattle your teeth, wondering how anyone could fall asleep after such a jolt. Yet a gentleman in a bowler hat is already reaching for his wallet, convinced this is the answer to his sleepless nights. A different display features fainting couches, low, narrow sofas originally intended for women overcome by tight corsets and stifling parlors. Now the salesman claims they are ideal for pre-bed relaxation. He encourages you to recline on one, and you admit it's surprisingly comfortable. But you doubt comfort alone will banish true insomnia, and the salesman quickly moves you along before you can dwell on that thought. In a small side room, you discover another category altogether: vibratory sleep aids. One bed features an internal clockwork mechanism that hums softly as it rocks back and forth. The salesman insists that the motion mirrors the natural rhythms of the human body, but you can't help imagining the mechanism breaking midnight and flinging its occupant across the room. A pamphlet on the table lists the benefits of each piece of furniture, promising improved digestion, steadier nerves, and fewer nightmares. The language is lofty, almost poetic, but you notice the fine print individual results may vary. You imagine more than one customer angrily returning their elaborate bed when the promised sleep never arrives. The salesman calls your attention to his newest invention, a canopy bed fitted with a sound-dampening hood. Heavy drapes and padded panels create an enclosed cocoon designed to block out noise and light. He draws the curtains to demonstrate, and the sudden hush is startling. You admit it might help, though it also feels like climbing into a padded coffin. As you step back into the main showroom, you see another customer negotiating a purchase. The salesman carefully explains the payment plan, emphasizing how much money the man will save by ending his insomnia-related suffering. You notice how easily the salesman weaves hope into every sentence, knowing the sleepless will pay almost anything for relief. When you finally leave the shop, the night air feels refreshingly simple compared to the mechanical chaos inside. You glance up at the fog-obscured stars, wondering how many Victorians lay awake in these elaborate beds, convinced their expensive furniture would eventually coax them into slumber. Up the street, the warm glow of a small cafe catches your eye. A sign in the window advertises diets and digestifs for restful nights. You're curious to see what strange food and drink Victorians believed could set the stage for sleep. With a sigh, you step toward the door, ready for the next round of questionable cures. You step into the cafe, a cozy Victorian establishment with marble-topped tables, flickering gas lamps, and the warm scent of roasted meat mingling with sweet spices. The patrons here aren't simply enjoying a late-night snack. They're following carefully prescribed sleep diets believed to coax the body into restful slumber. A waiter in a crisp apron greets you and sets a small menu before you. It's less a list of options and more a collection of instructions. For those troubled by insomnia, it begins, choose a gentle repast to settle the digestion. You scan the suggestions: undercooked mutton mashed root vegetables, warm beer laced with nutmeg. You stifle a grimace. At the next table, a man in a pinstriped suit solemnly sips a mug of warm ale. He tells you it's his physician's advice, claiming that the beer's slight alcohol content and the nutmeg's supposed sedative qualities help quiet the mind. Whether it actually works is another question entirely. Nearby, a young woman in a bonnet cuts dainty slices of cold-boiled potatoes. She explains she avoids rich foods at night because they excite the blood. Instead, she prefers bland fare, believing it keeps the body calm. You glance at her plate and wonder how anyone could find cold potatoes inspiring enough to eat, let alone as a sleep aid. Historians still argue whether Victorian sleep diets were rooted in genuine observation or just superstition dressed as science. One pamphlet on the cafe's counter declares that spices inflame the nerves, urging the sleepless to avoid them. Another insists that fatty cuts of beef can weigh down the body with the gravity of digestion, making sleep inevitable. These theories seem contradictory, but that doesn't stop people from following them with almost religious devotion. The waiter returns with a small dish of sleep pudding, a concoction of milk, breadcrumbs, and a dash of sugar. He assures you it is both nourishing and soporific. You take a tentative bite and find it bland, but oddly comforting, like eating warm porridge. Perhaps that was the point. Across the room, an older gentleman explains that his doctor prescribed a nightly glass of port wine to fortify the blood before bed. He sips slowly, savoring each swallow as though it were medicine. Another customer tells you he prefers a spoonful of brandy mixed with warm water, a sort of DIY nightcap. You can see how alcohol might lull the body into drowsiness, though it likely left more than a few Victorians groggy and headachy the next morning. In a corner table, a woman quietly unwraps a small packet of digestive powders and stirs them into her tea. She whispers that indigestion is the true enemy of sleep, and that these powders, bicarbonate of soda mixed with herbs, are her secret weapon. You nod, remembering how Victorian medicine often linked insomnia to stomach trouble, as though the mind could only rest when the body's machinery was perfectly in order. The cafe owner brings out a tray of strange offerings: lettuce water, a steaming cup of beef tea, and something he calls sleep broth, which appears to be thin chicken soup. He proudly declares that his recipes have helped countless customers drift into dreamless, restorative slumber. You watch a young man reluctantly gulp down a cup of the broth, his expression suggesting he would rather be anywhere else. One table over, a pair of friends debate whether skipping supper entirely is the best approach. One argues that going to bed hungry lightens the stomach and promotes sleep. The other insists he could never nod off with a growling belly. You can't help but think their insomnia might be worsened by all the fretting about food. As the cafe begins to close, you step back into the cool night air, your stomach faintly unsettled from the pudding, and the strong smell of beef tea still lingering in your nose. You can't decide if the Victorian sleep diets were harmless comfort rituals or misguided attempts to control something they barely understood. A small flyer posted to a nearby lamppost catches your eye. In bold letters, it advertises miracle elixirs and patent cure-alls for the sleepless available by post from London's finest. You glance at the illustration of a gleaming bottle surrounded by radiant stars and sigh. Another promise, another product. Curious, you follow the address printed at the bottom, wondering what new marvels or mischief await in the world of Victorian mail-order medicine. You follow the address on the flyer to a narrow storefront tucked between two larger buildings. Its window is packed with brightly colored bottles, tins and boxes, each one promising miraculous sleep. The sign above the door proudly declares, "Patent remedies for nervous disorders and sleeplessness mail orders." Welcome. You step inside and the air smells faintly of alcohol cloves and something medicinally sweet. The shopkeeper, a thin man with slicked back hair, greets you warmly and gestures toward the shelves. "We have everything you could possibly need," he says, his voice dripping with confidence. You scan the labels: Dr. Hartley's Slumber Syrup, Professor Bolton's Tranquility Elixir, and the oddly cheerful Nighty Night Drops. Each product boasts glowing endorsements printed in fancy script. One small box catches your eye: Dr. Morley's Electric Sleep Balm. The label claims it soothes the nerves and induces deep rest through scientifically proven galvanic principles. You open it to find nothing more than a jar of ointment with a strong peppermint smell. Historians still argue how much Victorians actually believed these claims, but you suspect that when desperation sets in, people will try almost anything. A young woman steps up to the counter clutching a bottle of Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup, a popular patent medicine. The shopkeeper tells her it's safe for children and guaranteed to stop restless crying. You glance at the label and notice its ingredients include alcohol and morphine. The woman doesn't ask questions. She simply pays and leaves, clutching the bottle like a lifeline. Nearby, a man in a worn overcoat eyes a display of sleep tablets, shaped like tiny pellets. The box promises they are non-habit forming, though you suspect that's a generous interpretation. The shopkeeper swoops in to explain that the tablets contain a proprietary blend of sedatives and botanicals. The man nods slowly, clearly too tired to ask for details, and adds a box to his growing collection. On another shelf, you find a bottle of lunar essence, said to be distilled under the light of the full moon for maximum potency. You wonder aloud if it actually works, and the shopkeeper leans in conspiratorially. "One dose and you'll sleep like the dead," he whispers. His expression is so earnest you almost believe him. You notice a mail-order desk in the corner where a clerk is carefully packing parcels into sturdy boxes. Each package is stuffed with colorful advertisements boasting impossible cures. One broadside claims a customer in Manchester slept for 12 hours straight after drinking Professor Bellamy's Dream Tonic. Another declares that Sir Reginald W. of Bath was entirely cured of 40 years' sleeplessness. You doubt the accuracy of these stories, but the Victorians thrived on testimonials. A pamphlet on the counter warns of counterfeit remedies, urging customers to buy only from reputable sources. You can't help but smile at the irony given how questionable many of these reputable products seem. Still, the sheer variety is impressive: syrups, powders, tonics, tablets, lozenges, and even small amulets infused with magnetized herbs. An elderly woman shuffles toward the counter with a basket full of different bottles. She explains to the shopkeeper that she's tried nearly every product in the shop, yet sleep continues to evade her. He gently recommends the newest arrival, Dr. Alcott's Hypnotic Draft, a thick liquid with a rich cherry scent. She hesitates only a moment before handing over her coins. Historians still debate whether these patent medicines did more harm than good. Some contained genuinely sedating ingredients. Others were little more than alcohol, sugar, and clever marketing. But for those who couldn't afford doctors or who were too embarrassed to seek help, they offered at least the illusion of control. You step outside with the sound of the shopkeeper's cheery farewell echoing behind you. The night is quieter now, the streets nearly empty. In the distance, you see the silhouette of a large brick building, its tall chimneys releasing faint wisps of smoke. A plaque near the door identifies it as the Royal Hospital for Nervous Disorders. Curious, you make your way closer, wondering how Victorian medical institutions treated those whose sleeplessness had become unbearable. The hospital looms large as you approach its brick facade, dark against the night sky. The front doors creak as you push them open, and you step into a wide, echoing corridor lined with polished tile floors and the faint smell of antiseptic. A nurse in a crisp white apron greets you with a polite nod, but says nothing, ushering you deeper into the building. This is not a place for the mildly sleepless. The Royal Hospital for Nervous Disorders admits those whose insomnia has reached a point of true crisis. You follow the nurse through dimly lit wards where patients lie motionless on narrow, iron-framed beds, their faces pale and eyes hollow from nights, sometimes weeks without sleep. The silence is oppressive, broken only by the occasional murmur or the scrape of a chair against the floor. A physician in a black coat approaches, his expression grave. He explains that chronic insomnia is considered a sign of nervous collapse, a diagnosis feared almost as much as madness. Some patients are here voluntarily, others were brought in by desperate families. Treatment, he says, varies: warm baths, sedatives, and strict routines designed to restore the natural rhythm of the body. He leads you into a small treatment room where a patient sits slumped in a chair, an assistant carefully rubbing a narcotic ointment into her temples. The physician explains it is a mixture of opium and belladonna intended to calm the nervous system. He admits it is not always effective and its side effects can be severe. You notice the woman's eyelids fluttering, her breathing slow and shallow. In another room, you find a man lying beneath heavy woolen blankets with heated bricks at his feet. The attending nurse says the warmth draws blood from the brain and can sometimes coax a patient into sleep. Historians still argue whether this belief had any real scientific basis or was simply wishful thinking. Farther down the hall, you peer into a locked ward reserved for the most severe cases. Here, patients are kept in near total isolation, their rooms stripped of distractions. One man sits in a straight-backed chair staring at the wall, his hands trembling. Another paces in tight circles, muttering to himself. A nurse quietly tells you some have been awake for so long they've begun hallucinating. The hospital maintains strict schedules, hoping the predictability will reset the body. Meals are served at the same time each day, lights extinguished at precisely the same hour. If patients cannot sleep, they are encouraged to lie quietly in bed and avoid stimulating activity. You think about the strict routines you witnessed in private homes and realize the hospital's approach is simply a harsher version. In a large common room, a group of patients sits in silence as a nurse reads aloud from the Bible. She speaks slowly and softly, the rhythm of her voice intended to soothe. A few patients nod off briefly in their chairs, only to jerk awake moments later. The nurse sighs but continues reading, determined to maintain the calm atmosphere. You notice a locked cabinet filled with bottles of chloroform and chloral hydrate. The physician explains these stronger sedatives are used sparingly, reserved for those on the brink of collapse. He warns that the line between therapeutic and dangerous is perilously thin. You imagine the weight of deciding whether to knock someone into oblivion simply so they can rest. A young nurse leads you into a quieter wing where the air is warmer and the lighting softer. Here, patients are treated with gentler methods, massage herbal teas and long walks in the hospital's walled gardens. One woman tells you she finds comfort in the gardens, even if the walks rarely lead to actual sleep. Before you leave, the physician pauses to reflect on the hospital's mission. He admits they cannot cure everyone. Some patients eventually return home, others remain for months, and a few never leave. He looks weary, as though the burden of so much suffering weighs heavily on him. You step outside into the cool night air, the silence of the hospital lingering in your ears. Across the street, you notice a small chapel glowing faintly with candlelight. A sign by the door promises prayer and charms for the sleepless. Curious, you cross the street, ready to witness how faith and superstition offered Victorians yet another path to the rest they so desperately sought. You cross the quiet street and push open the chapel door, the faint creak of the hinges, nearly lost beneath the soft murmur of voices inside. The scent of beeswax candles and dried herbs fills the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of incense that lingers in the rafters. This is no ordinary chapel service. It's a gathering for those who have tried every remedy for their sleeplessness and found no relief. Here, faith and superstition are their final refuge. A priest in a worn cassock stands near the altar blessing small bundles of herbs tied with ribbon. Each bundle contains sprigs of rosemary lavender and sometimes a pinch of dried hops. He hands them to the congregants with a quiet prayer instructing them to place the charms under their pillows. To calm the mind and keep nightmares away, he whispers, "You watch as the attendees clutch the bundles tightly, their faces filled with fragile hope." Historians still argue whether these charms were meant as true medicine or simply symbols of comfort. Either way, you can see how the ritual might ease an anxious heart. One woman presses her charm to her chest and tells you that her grandmother swore by rosemary for restful sleep. Another man insists that lavender has God-given powers to drive out evil dreams. You nod, remembering how these same herbs appeared in the herbal teas and bathhouses you've already visited. On the far side of the chapel, a group kneels together in prayer. The priest intones softly, asking for deliverance from restless spirits of the night. Some participants rock back and forth as they pray, while others simply bow their heads in silence. You notice tears on a few faces, evidence of just how deeply the sleepless suffer. In a corner, a woman wearing a shawl embroidered with protective symbols sells small talismans. Each one bears a tiny cross, a crescent moon, or a carved figure of a saint. She explains that these amulets, when worn close to the heart, protect the wearer from malicious influences that disrupt sleep. She shows you a polished stone inscribed with the word peace, claiming it was blessed by a traveling monk. You suspect she's as much a businesswoman as a believer, but the customers don't seem to care. Another table is set with shallow bowls of holy water. People dip their fingers in and trace small crosses on their foreheads, murmuring quiet invocations. One man fills a small vial to take home, explaining that he'll sprinkle a few drops on his bed each night. You imagine him standing over the mattress with the vial, desperate to banish whatever unseen force keeps him awake. A hushed conversation catches your ear. A woman describes how she recently visited a folk healer in the countryside who gave her a sachet filled with salt and iron nails. The healer told her to hang it above her bed to pin down wandering spirits. She laughs nervously as she says it hasn't worked yet, but admits she's afraid to remove it just in case. The priest closes the evening's gathering with a blessing, walking slowly down the aisle and sprinkling holy water on the assembled group. He urges them to keep faith, to believe that rest will come in time. You can feel the mix of reverence and desperation in the room as the attendees file out into the night clutching their charms and talismans. Outside, the fog is thick, muting the sounds of the city. You walk along a quiet street lined with townhouses, their windows glowing faintly. Through one open curtain, you see a Victorian household winding down for the evening. Servants move quietly through the rooms, extinguishing lamps and drawing curtains. In the bedroom, a woman lies beneath heavy blankets, clutching a charm at her chest. Her husband turns over beside her, sighing softly as he tries to settle. You pause at the window, watching the familiar pattern of another sleepless night begin. And as you step back into the darkness, you realize the story of insomnia in Victorian times isn't just about strange remedies and hopeful inventions. It's about the quiet, ordinary households where people prayed, worried, and waited for sleep to finally come. The fog thickens as you make your way toward a familiar lane, where a tall townhouse stands with its windows dark. You're drawn inside, back into the life of a typical Victorian family. Tonight, you'll see how these rituals, routines, and cures finally culminate in the most ordinary and most precious thing of all, drifting off to sleep. You slip quietly through the doorway of the tall townhouse, the one you glimpsed through the fog, and find yourself in the gentle hush of a Victorian household at night. The servants have already finished their rounds, the lamps are extinguished, the curtains drawn tight, and the faint glow of embers in the parlor hearth is the only remaining light. The house seems to exhale with relief, as though the day's labors have finally settled into rest. Upstairs, you hear the soft shuffle of slippers on carpet. The lady of the house moves slowly down the hallway, carrying a small ceramic cup of warm milk, sprinkled with a pinch of nutmeg. She pauses outside the nursery door, listening for the even breathing of her children. Satisfied they're asleep, she steps into her own bedroom, the heavy door closing with a muffled click. Her husband sits propped against the pillows, a small Bible in his lap. He glances up and offers a weary smile. "Just a few verses," he murmurs, turning the thin pages with deliberate care. She nods, setting the cup on the bedside table and slipping beneath the thick woolen blankets. The room is cool, the air tinged with the faint scent of lavender sachets tucked beneath the pillows. As he reads aloud, his voice low and steady, she closes her eyes and listens. The rhythm of the words is comforting, even if she isn't fully attending to their meaning. This ritual is as much for the body as the soul. Historians still argue whether Victorian bedtime habits like these were effective sleep aids or simply acts of faith. But you can see how the familiar cadence might ease a restless mind. When the reading is done, he sets the Bible aside and draws the curtains tighter against the street lamp glow. He checks that the small, hop-filled pillow is in place at his wife's side, a superstitious charm, but one they've both grown attached to. She murmurs a thanks, clutching it close as she turns to face the wall. Down the hall, a younger servant lies awake on a narrow cot, hands folded over her stomach. She whispers a quick prayer, touches the rosemary charm pinned to her nightgown, and exhales slowly. The room is cold and the mattress lumpy, but she's too tired to care. She's thinking of the herbal tea she drank earlier, hoping it will finally work tonight. You pass by another room where an elderly man sleeps in a rocking bed, its mechanism set to a gentle sway. The bed creaks softly with each motion, the sound oddly soothing in the silence. On the bedside table is a bottle of laudanum, the cork firmly in place. Tonight, at least, he won't need it. The house falls into a deeper quiet, the kind that makes you acutely aware of your own breathing. Outside, the fog muffles the distant sounds of the city. Inside, hearts beat a little slower, breaths grow deeper. One by one, the residents surrender to sleep, though not without the help of countless remedies, teas, charms, prayers, routines, and the comforting thought that they've done everything they could. You linger by the window for a moment, watching the mist curl around the street lamps. Beyond this house and countless other homes, Victorians are lying awake or drifting off each one, hoping that tonight will be different. Some will wake again in an hour, others will sleep soundly until morning. But in this house, at least, the night finally brings the peace they've sought. The world outside fades the glow of the street lamps, dimming as the fog thickens. You stand in the stillness of the sleeping house, hearing only the faintest rustle of sheets and the soft, rhythmic breaths of those who have at last found rest. The air is cool and heavy with the scent of lavender and beeswax, a gentle reminder of the rituals that brought them here. You move slowly through the quiet halls, your footsteps lighter now, as though you too are reluctant to disturb the fragile peace. Each room you pass tells a story, a child curled against a stuffed toy, a parent's hand dangling off the edge of the bed, a servant snuggled beneath a threadbare blanket, her rosemary charm still clutched tightly in her palm. Outside, the fog has muffled the city's usual clamor. The factories have gone silent, the carriage is stilled. Even the wind has quieted, leaving only the soft hum of the night. You can almost imagine the world holding its breath, as if it too knows how precious sleep is when it finally arrives. Your own body feels heavier now, you're breathing deeper. The memories of gaslit streets and sleepless faces begin to blur at the edges, fading like mist under the morning sun. Each breath carries you further from the clamor of Victorian cures, the teas, the charms, the humming machines, and closer to the simplicity of stillness. The house sighs softly in its sleep, and you let that sound carry you with it. There's no need for herbs or laudanum or elaborate furniture now, only the slow, steady rhythm of rest. You settle into the quiet, letting it wrap around you like the warmest of blankets, and allow the last flickers of wakefulness to fade. Sweet dreams.